Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. This presentation is a breakdown of what occurs in America under the Constitution when there is a contested election, which is what we are currently witnessing with the 2020 election. On December 14th, 2020, state legislatures met across the country to cast their vote for the president. This begins the certification process, and folks, it's a process. Not a one-day event or a one-action event, but it is a process of which doesn't become official until January 6th, and we will get into that momentarily. The state legislatures, with the exception of the 1876 election, always appoint electors based on the state's popular vote tabulations. And so let's talk a little bit about this 1876 election. The 1876 election was one of the most contentious elections in history, although these folks hadn't seen the 2016 or 2020 elections unfold yet at this time. It pitted Republican Rutherford B. Hayes versus Democrat Samuel J. Tilden. The results of the election remain among the most disputed ever. Tilden had won 184 electoral votes to Hayes's 165, with 20 votes from 4 states unresolved. In Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, each party reported its candidate had won the state, while in Oregon, one elector was replaced after being declared illegal for being a, quote, elected or appointed official. The question of who should have been awarded these electoral votes is the source of the continued controversy, eerily similar to what we are watching unfold today. An informal deal was struck to resolve the dispute, the Compromise of 1877, which awarded all 20 electoral votes to Hayes. In return for the Democrats' acquiescence to Hayes's election, the Republicans agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, ending Reconstruction. So, essentially, in this case, the Democrats agreed not to continue to contest the results after the certification was complete, but in return, the Republicans had to do a few things. One being pull out the troops that were still occupying the South after the conclusion of the Civil War. And I'd like to point out quickly, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that we may be fighting the exact same people with the same ideologies that we are fighting today. And I asked you to look up the Communist Manifesto published in 1848 and research the rioting across Europe that almost immediately occurred, like in Paris. And then understand that shortly after those riots, we see a civil war kick off in America in 1861, merely 13 years after the publishing of Marx's Communist Manifesto. And 13 years is a very short period of time back then, when information traveled at a snail's pace compared to today. Now, digging deeper into that election, we find that in Florida, with 4 electoral votes, Louisiana with 8, and South Carolina with 7, they reported returns favoring Tilden. But the elections in each state were marked by electoral fraud and threats of violence against Republican voters. The most extreme case was in South Carolina, where an impossible 101% of all eligible voters in the state had their votes counted. And I guess they hadn't seen Wayne County and some counties in Pennsylvania yet at that time. They recorded 150 or some percent of eligible voters voting. Unbelievable. One of the points of contention revolved around the design of the ballots. To aid illiterate voters, the parties would print symbols on the tickets. And in this election, many Democrat ballots were printed with the Republican symbol, Abraham Lincoln, on them. The Republican-dominated State Electoral Commission subsequently rejected enough Democrat votes to award their electoral votes to Hayes. So the election was diseased with all kinds of fraud, folks. And I guess some things never change. Has the Dem Party always been immoral and crooked since its founding? Folks, these irregularities from this 1877 election are almost mirror images of the crap that occurred in 2020. In 2 southern states, the governor recognized by the United States had signed the Republican certificates. The Democratic certificates from Florida were signed by the state attorney general and the newly elected Democratic governor. Those from Louisiana were signed by the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, or the guy who ran for governor in that election. And those from South Carolina by no state official. They were just sent, with the Tilden electors claiming that they were chosen by the popular vote and they were rejected by the state election board. Meanwhile, in Oregon, the vote of a single elector was disputed. The statewide result clearly favored Hayes, but the state's Democratic governor, Lafayette Grover, claimed that one of the GOP electors, former Postmaster John Watts, was ineligible under Article 3, Section 1 of the United States Constitution since he was a person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States. And he was substituted with a Democratic elector in his place. The two Republican electors dismissed Grover's action and each reported 3 votes for Hayes, while the Democratic elector, C.A. Cronin, reported 1 vote for Tilden and 2 votes for Hayes. The two Republican electors presented a certificate signed by the Secretary of State of Oregon, while Cronin and the 2 electors he appointed presented a certificate signed by the governor and attested by the Secretary of State. And so we can see here we have dueling electors, just as we do today. Now let's take a look at that document that those geniuses wrote up so long ago and look into this certification process a bit more. The Constitution provides that, quote, the President of the Senate shall, in presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the electoral certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. Certain Republicans held that the power to count the votes lay with the President of the Senate, the House and Senate being more spectators. In 1876, the Democrats objected to this construction since the Republican President of the Senate, whom is the Vice President, and in this case, Republican Thomas W. Ferry, could then count the votes of the disputed states for Hayes. The Democrats objected to this, and that is what allowed and led to the Great Compromise of 1877. And continuing on 1876, the Democrats insisted that Congress should continue the practice followed since 1865, which was that no vote objected to should be counted except by the concurrence of both houses. However, the House had a solid Democratic majority. By rejecting the vote of one state, it would elect Tilden. Facing an unprecedented constitutional crisis, the Congress of the United States passed a law on January 29, 1877, that formed a 15-member electoral commission to settle the result. 5 members were selected from each house of Congress, and they were joined by 5 members of the Supreme Court. The majority party in each house named 3 members, and the minority party 2. As the Republicans controlled the Senate and the Democrats the House of Representatives, this yielded 5 Democratic and 5 Republican members of the commission. Of the Supreme Court justices, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats were chosen, with the 5th to be selected by those 4. The justices first selected a political independent, Justice David Davis. And according to one historian, no one, perhaps not even Davis himself, knew which presidential candidate he preferred. Just as the Electoral Commission bill was passing Congress, the legislature of Illinois elected Davis to the Senate, and Democrats in the Illinois legislature believed that they had purchased Davis's support by voting for him. However, they had miscalculated, as Davis promptly excused himself from the commission and resigned as a justice in order to take his Senate seat. As all the remaining available justices were Republicans, the 4 justices already selected chose Justice Joseph P. Bradley, who was considered the most impartial remaining member of the court. This selection proved decisive. Since it was drawing perilously near to Inauguration Day, which was later than it is now, the commission met on January 31st. Each of the disputed state election cases, Florida, Louisiana, Oregon, and South Carolina, was respectively submitted to the commission by Congress. Bradley then joined the other 7 Republican committee members in a series of 8-7 votes that gave all 20 disputed electoral votes to Hayes, giving Hayes a 185 to 184 electoral vote victory. The commission adjourned on March 2nd. Hayes privately took the oath of office the next day and was publicly sworn into office on March 5, 1877. And Hayes was inaugurated without incident. According to Wikipedia, it reads that, though it is not possible to conclude definitively what the result would have been if a fair election had been held without the violence and intimidation throughout the South that disenfranchised many African Americans made eligible to vote under the 15th Amendment, In the likeliest fair scenario, Hayes would have won the election with 189 electoral votes to Tilden's 180 by winning all the states that he did ultimately carry, plus Mississippi, but minus Florida. In a truly fair election, it seems probable that South Carolina, Mississippi, and Louisiana, which all had majority black populations, would have gone Republican, while Florida, with a majority white population, would have likely gone to Tilden. It is therefore likely that Hayes would have won appreciably more of the popular vote in a fair election, perhaps even a plurality or a majority. And I'd like to point out all the African Americans voting Republican, and this happened all the way up until about the 1960s, and then that all changed. It's a scam, folks. Congress would eventually enact the Electoral Count Act in 1877 to provide more detailed rules for the counting of electoral votes, especially in cases where multiple slates of electors have been received from a single state. And that makes for a great segue into the rules of a contested election today. The Electoral Count Act of 1877 is a United States federal law establishing procedures for the counting of electoral votes by Congress following a presidential election. The law has subsequently been codified with some modifications into positive law in Title III, Chapter 1 of the United States Code, which also contains other provisions related to presidential elections and vacancies. The law was enacted in the aftermath of the disputed 1876 presidential election, in which several states submitted competing slates of electors and a divided Congress was unable to resolve the deadlock. The central provisions of the law have not been seriously tested in a disputed election, the closest approach being in the contentious 2000 presidential election, which was ultimately resolved before the electors casted their votes. However, the law's timing provisions did not play a role in court decisions such as Bush v. Gore regarding that elections. But ladies and gentlemen, this act is getting ready to be seriously tested. The President and Vice President of the United States are formally elected by the Electoral College. The Constitution gives each state the power to appoint its electors, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, with all states currently using some form of popular election. The electors are appointed at the national election held on Election Day, which occurs on the Tuesday next after the first Monday in November. After Election Day, the electors chosen in each state must then meet and give their votes on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, with meetings of electors typically held in each state capital. The 12th Amendment, ratified in 1804, requires the electors to, quote, make distinct lists of all persons voted for as president and of all persons voted for as vice president, and of the number of votes for each, which lists they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. It also specifies that the President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates and the votes shall then be counted. The act was touted as a compromise measure in an atmosphere relatively free of partisan pressures. And I want you guys to listen to this very closely. Under the law, while Congress claimed full power to validate votes, its role was limited to cases in which a state had failed to settle its own disputes and to question beyond state competence. Now, this is where all of these recent state legislature hearings come into play, folks. They were essentially attempting to settle the claims of fraud in the election in Pennsylvania and couldn't. Hence, for instance, Pennsylvania is sending dual electors to D.C. next month, kicking the decision on the presidency to Congress. Continuing now, 3 U.S. Code Section 5 gives the states an initial opportunity to finalize their own controversies regarding the appointment of electors. The provision applies if the state has provided by laws enacted prior to the day fixed for the appointment of the electors, and that is through laws enacted before Election Day, for its final determination of any controversy or contest by judicial or other methods or procedures, and such determination has been made at least 6 days before the time fixed for the meeting of electors, December 14th. If the determination is made pursuant to such law existing before Election Day, then that determination shall be conclusive and shall govern in the counting of the electoral votes. so far as the ascertainment of the electors appointed by such state is concerned. And again, this is what we've just seen play out, folks. Again, in the ruling of Bush v. Gore, the United States Supreme Court states that state legislatures' powers to select the manner for appointing electors is plenary. It may, if it so chooses, select the electors itself. And plenary means formal and official. It is the opposite of summary. And those hearings that we all witnessed these last few weeks were formal or plenary. And so, we officially have a contested election, folks. Let's quickly touch upon how electors are nominated. The process is up to the states to decide. Most, in fact 33 I believe, nominate their electors for each party in the summertime at each party's respective conventions. This is to say that two sets of electors are nominated, one for the R's and one for the D's. On Election Day, in this case November 3rd, 2020, and I'll take Michigan, my home state, as an example. Michigan then, based on the popular vote from its citizens, will then choose the electors from the party that held the popular vote in that state. Generally, the parties select members known for their loyalty and service to the party, such as party leaders, state and local elected officials, and party activists. On the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December, this year being December 14th, the electors meet in each state and cast their ballots for president and vice president. Each elector votes on his or her own ballot and signs it. The ballots are immediately transmitted to various people. One copy goes to the President of the United States Senate, who is also the Vice President of the United States. This is the copy that will be officially counted later. Other copies go to the State Secretary of State, the National Archives and Record Administration, and the presiding judge in the district where the electors meet, and these serve as backup copies. While the 12th Amendment describes how electors must meet and cast their votes, it did not foresee multiple competing slates of electoral votes from the same state. To help avoid this problem in future elections, Section 3 of the Electoral Count Act created an ascertainment process to help Congress determine who the state's valid electors are, including a role for the governor. 3 U.S. Code Section 6 requires the governor of each state to prepare 7 original copies of a certificate of ascertainment, each under the seal of the state, which identifies the electors appointed by the state and the votes they received, as well as the names of all other candidates for elector and the votes they received. The electors that are being appointed are determined, quote, under and in pursuance of the law of such state providing such ascertainment. The name of the presidential candidate and vice presidential candidate do not appear on the certificates, neither do the number of votes. The certificates only include the names of the slate of electors. The certificate must be issued as soon as practicable after the conclusion of the appointment of electors in a state by final ascertainment under and in pursuance of the laws of such state providing for such ascertainment. That is, the certificates must be prepared as soon as possible after Election Day. The certificate must be sent by registered mail to the archivist of the United States at least 6 days before the Electoral College meets, and 6 original copies must be delivered to the electors on or before the day on which they are required to meet and cast their votes. If an election had been contested, as the 2020 has, 3 U.S. Code Section 6 also provides that, quote, if there shall have been any final determination in a state in the manner provided for by state law of a controversy or contest, then the governor must, as soon as practicable after such determination, communicate under the seal of the state a certificate of such determination in form and manner as the same shall have been made. This suggests that if a governor is ignoring controversy or a contested election result and not issuing a determination and communicating it properly, she is breaking federal law, or he is breaking federal law. So it seems that this rule forces the governor in a contested state to allow 2 sets of electors to attend the Senate on January 6 for the finalization of the certification process. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about January 6th and what is going to happen then. Section 4 of the Electoral Count Act now through U.S. Code Section 15, provides both detailed procedures and counting rules for specific situations. It significantly expands upon the 12th Amendment, which states only that, quote, the President of the Senate or the VP shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The Electoral Act expands on this. It says, Congress shall be in session on the 6th day of January, succeeding every meeting of the electors. The Senate and House of Representatives shall meet in the hall of the House of Representatives at the hour of 1 o'clock in the afternoon on that day, and the President of the Senate shall be their presiding officer. 2 tellers shall be previously appointed on the part of the Senate and 2 on the part of the House of Representatives, to whom shall be handed, as they are opened by the President of the Senate, all the certificates of the electoral votes shall be opened, presented, and acted upon in the alphabetical order of the states, beginning with the letter A. And said tellers, having then read the same in the presence of the states and hearing of the 2 houses, shall make a list of the votes as they shall appear from the said certificates. And the votes having been ascertained and counted according to the rules in this subchapter provided, the result of the same shall be delivered to the President of the Senate, who shall thereupon announce the state of the vote, which announcement shall be deemed a sufficient declaration of the persons, if any, elected President and Vice President of the United States, and together with a list of the votes be entered in the journals of the 2 houses. And this is the process as it occurs almost every 4 years in this country. But this will not be the process that we will see unfold next month. Now, ladies and gentlemen, listen to this next sentence, because this is what we are getting ready to see occur. Upon such reading of any certificate or paper, the President of the Senate shall call for objections, if any. Every objection shall be made in writing, and shall state clearly and concisely, and without argument, the ground thereof, and shall be signed by at least 1 senator. And it is rumored that Rand Paul has already claimed that he will do this, and 1 member of the House of Representatives, and Jim Jordan, it is rumored, will do this on behalf of the House, before the same shall be received. When all objections so made to any vote or paper from a state shall have been received and read, the Senate shall thereupon withdraw, and such objections shall be submitted to the Senate for its decision. And the Speaker of the House of Representatives shall, in like manner, submit such objections to the House of Representatives for its decision. And no electoral vote or votes from any state shall be rejected, but the 2 houses concurrently may reject the vote or votes when they agree that such vote or votes have not been so regularly given by electors. And so, quickly to put this into English a little bit, it's saying that if there's an objection to a state's chosen electors, and if that objection is signed by a senator and a rep, then both the Senate and the House withdraw to their respective places of work, and they convene a debate in an attempt to resolve the said objection. Their goal is to either affirm the objection and thus accept the alternate elector slates, or to reject the objection and thus accept the original electors. But keep in mind that this pertains to both houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. They both must agree to accept or reject the alternate set of electors. And now back to the code. If more than 1 return from a state shall have been received by the President of the Senate, those votes and those only shall be counted which shall have been regularly given by the electors who are shown by the determination mentioned in Section 5 to have been appointed. And if the determination in said section provided for shall have been made, or by such successors or substitutes, in a case of a vacancy in the board of electors so ascertained, as have been appointed to fill such vacancy in the mode provided by the laws of the state. Now, I didn't even understand that, but it's actually simple. They're saying that if 2 sets of electors are presented, then the President of the Senate will accept those that have been appointed legally according to Section 5. And to go back to Michigan and its electoral nomination process, each party chooses a set during their conventions. The electors who are the party of the candidate who won the popular vote in Michigan are the ones that the governor is supposed to certify on December 14th. But this assumes that the election is not being contested. In the event that an election is being contested, due to whatever reason, in 1876 and in 220, fraud is one of the main reasons, then remember 3 U.S. Code Section 6, where it says, quote, if there shall have been any final determination in a state in the manner provided for by state law of a controversy or contest, then the governor must, as soon as practicable after such determination, communicate under the seal of the state a certificate of such determination in form and manner as the same shall have been made. So basically, this is saying that if the election is being contested, and it is officially being contested as the hearings are plenary or official or formal, and thus meets the criteria within this code, then the government must formally notify the President of the Senate of this and let them know that 2 sets of electors will be coming to the Senate on January 6th. Now, but in the case there shall arise the question which of 2 or more of such state authorities determining what electors have been appointed per Section 5 is the official tribunal of such state, the votes regularly given of those electors and those only of such state shall be counted whose title as electors is authorized by its law. And in such case of more than one return from a state, if there shall have been no such determination of the question of the state aforesaid, then those votes and those only shall be counted which the 2 houses shall concurrently decided were cast by lawful electors appointed in such votes not to be the lawful votes of the legally appointed electors of such state. Now again, let's stop and translate this. It's saying that they accept the electors that were certified by the rightful executive of the state. In Michigan, that's Governor Whitmer. But if you recall from earlier, she must communicate under the seal of the state a certificate of such determination of a controversy or contest in that state. So as an example of a separate entity accepting a slate of electors, we've seen how Oregon and Florida and Louisiana did it in 1876 using attorney generals, and I believe South Carolina didn't even use anybody. They just said the popular vote gives us this authority. Okay, in Nevada, Governor Sisolak and the Nevada Secretary of State accepted the 6 Biden electors and sent them to the Congress. However, the Republicans met and nominated 6 Republican electors and was accepted and signed by Republican Chairman Michael McDonald and Vice Chair Jim DeGraffenreid and sent to Congress. It's saying that if 2 sets of electors are sent, then it kicks in another process. It charges the Senate and the House of Representatives to agree on which elector slate to accept. Also, if there are any objections to the returns from any state, they must be resolved before the process can continue to the next state. And a quote from U.S. Code 3, no votes or papers from any other state shall be acted upon until the objections previously made to the votes or papers from any state shall have been finally disposed of. And to clarify an objection, the structure of the Electoral Count Act's procedural provisions generally requires that any questions arising during the counting process be determined by the 2 houses acting separately, rather than by both houses together on the House floor. 3 U.S. Code Section 18 states that the President of the Senate shall have power to preserve order, and no debate shall be allowed, and no question shall be put by the presiding officers except to either house on a motion to withdraw. And U.S. Code 3, Section 17 states that whenever the 2 houses have separated to decide upon an objection or other question arising in the matter, each senator and representative may speak to such objections or question for 5 minutes, and not more than once. After the debate has lasted 2 hours, the presiding officer of each house must put the main question without further debate. Once the 2 houses have voted, they shall immediately meet again, and the presiding officer shall then announce the decision of the question submitted. It then goes on to say that once back in the joint session, that the joint session cannot be dissolved, quote, until the count of electoral votes shall be completed and the result declared. So they are charged with continuing to debate until they come to a resolution. Okay, and now back to January 6th and the vice president. The Constitution instructs that electoral votes must be sent to the President of the Senate, who is the sitting vice president of the United States, and that the Senate president must open all of the certificates in the presence of both houses. However, the sitting vice president is sometimes a candidate for president in the election, is often a candidate for re-election to the vice presidency, and is almost always a partisan with a keen interest in the outcome. Recognizing this, one key purpose of the Electoral Count Act's procedural provisions is, quote, to drain away as much power as possible from the Senate president, whom the law appoints to preside at the joint session when Congress counts the votes. As the custodian for papers, the Senate president is required by the Constitution to open all the certificates. In doing so, the goal of the act was to reduce the Senate president's discretionary power as gatekeeper to the absolute minimum. As the presiding officer during the joint session, the Electoral Count Act's provisions governing debate and procedure are usually specific. These provisions, again, seem designed to drain as much power as possible away from the chair and give it to the two houses. And so if this process fails, if the two houses cannot determine the sufficient amount of qualified electors for a candidate to get to 270, then it kicks back to the 12th Amendment, where it states implicitly, quote, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one vote, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. Meaning that each state gets one vote and a simple majority wins the presidency. So to tie this all up really quickly, we are going to see 7 dueling electors show up on January 6th. They will be seen as objections, and there will be one member of the Senate and one member of the House who will officially object, shooting the debate to both houses. The House of Representatives will never vote for a Trump elector, and in most of the 7 cases, if not all, the Senate will not vote for a Biden elector. And even if they do choose a Biden elector in one of the 7 dueling scenarios, I find it hard to believe that the Senate will do so in all 7 instances. In which case, neither candidate will hit 270. So per the Constitution, the 12th Amendment will kick in and send this vote off to the state legislatures for a 1 vote per state simple majority vote for president. Of course, if this ends up in a tie, a whole different set of things will occur, but that is something for another presentation, as this scenario is highly, highly unlikely. I'd like to let you know, folks, that as of this moment, 29 states in the United States are controlled at the state level by a Republican majority House of Representatives. Dear listeners, checkmate. It was over before it started. If you enjoyed this presentation, please like, share, and subscribe, and please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. Thank you for watching.